hello. Mm-hmm. Okay. We've been informed that if we try and touch this equipment, we are going to die. So if anyone was requesting that we would do that, we're probably going to have to turn that down.
Yeah, or just warn us first. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, to coming to... why do we like to kill God?
Yeah, why do we want to kill God?
I want to thank Joe for what is absolutely the most badass name for a panel I've ever been a part of. And me and Joe got talking, and it was very quickly obvious that we both love JRPGs.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess, Joe, I want to start just by, like, getting a little bit of your history and, like, what got you into it? Like, what was the first one that really kind of clicked with you?
Okay, so the first JRPG I think I ever played was Final Fantasy IV, right? I had it. I mean, it was Final Fantasy II because I had it on Super Nintendo, like the little, right? And I borrowed it from a friend, and I never gave it back to him.
Hell yeah.
Like, I remember waking up, like, before school, like, setting an alarm so I could get up at 5:30 so I could continue playing that because I just needed more time. And then I just, rode the Final Fantasy franchise all the way, I'm still playing 14. And some sidebars with things like Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross. Xenogears is my, like, fave of all time, like my favorite JRPG of all time. We were talking about that a little bit before, but what about you? Like, where did you start?
So, like, I had never seen an RPG or anything turn-based at all, and then one day I went to my cousin's, and he had a PlayStation, and he had borrowed Final Fantasy VII, and so I was like watching him play it, and immediately I was like, why is no one moving in the fight? Why are they just letting each other attack? And I always remember my cousin turned around to me, and he was like 4 years older than me, and like I always looked up to him, and he goes, John, you don't have to be mad about everything. And I was like, he's right. But I ended up like really falling in love with that game, like just the look of it and everything. And I always remember, spoilers for Final Fantasy VII here. There's a moment where Aeris dies, and the way I found out about it was like, basically I would go over to his house, watch him play it, and then I'd go home, and then I'd come back, and he'd be like further along in the game because he had kept playing it. And I started to really like Aeris, just thought like, she was like really cool character design, and like I thought her magic stuff was really cool. And I was like, I think like I was really young, but I was like kind of the start of like a little crush on her. And then I came back one evening, and he wasn't using Aeris, and I was like, why isn't Aeris in your party? And he just turns around to me, and again, he was like much older. He goes, yeah, she's fucking dead. And I was like, then revive her.
Where's your Phoenix down?
And he's just like, no, your man with the sword, he stabbed her. She's dead. She's dead. I was there, and I was like heartbroken because I couldn't believe that like a character could die. Like it was like, that doesn't happen in video games. And I think like that feeling, like even not seeing the cutscene was so strong that I was like, man, these RPGs, like there's really something to them,
There's a depth to them that like it takes you by surprise. Even in like Final Fantasy IV, where characters, they drop dead like flies.
Yep.
It like, it still happens. They weren't JRPGs are not scared to make you feel stuff.
And I think like a part of it is because like they are so long, you really get attached to your little group of guys.
Oh yeah.
And then like when something happens, it is like really genuinely devastating. I'm curious, like in terms of party members,
okay,
what would be someone like your games with like the absolute like these are your homies, these are your little dudes?
So I was just talking about this like a couple weeks ago. Like, what is your weird video game tick, right? Like, what is one thing you have to do? I have to put romantic pairs together in the party, right? Which is like, I guess like the 1992 version of shipping, whatever you youngins call it now, right? Which is like the same thing. So like, like I guess there's no really party building in Final Fantasy IV, but like Locke and Celes are always together in Final Fantasy VI. Cloud and Tifa are always together in Final Fantasy VI. So like if there's ever like a pair, that's like the primary, like it has nothing to do with like how well they do in combat. Is it like, is the story, does it serve a story that's like playing in my head? So like that's how I build my party. And then I, make up for whatever weaknesses I have somehow.
So did you just confirm that you would definitely be more Cloud and Tifa as opposed to Cloud and Aeris?
Oh, 100%. And I'm like, I'll go further and say that like Tifa's theme is better than Aeris' theme. By like a long shot. Don't play me Aeris' theme. I'm done with that song. I agree with every word of this, by the way. There we go.
Just to be clear. I did like Eris originally, but then Tifa, I was like, I mean, she seems pretty fucking cool. When I played Rebirth and I got to the day, and like I do like Aerith and Rebirth, and I was like, who am I gonna get? Who am I gonna get? And I opened the door, and it's fucking like the three guys, and they're like, hey bro, let's hang out. And I was like, the fuck we are. And I literally went back like 12 hours, did all the side quests. Oh,
Worth it though.
Yeah, no, it was totally worth it.
Yeah, absolutely worth it.
So you mentioned Xenogears
Yeah.
is like one of your all-time favorites.
Yes.
I have never played Xenogears, and it's one of like the glaring holes in my like JRPG history. Sell me and anyone who has not played Xenogears. How many people here are Xenogears heads?
Oh, not that many.
Not that
This
many.
is normal, right?
Yeah,
This is totally
okay,
normal.
yep.
So, like, if you want a introspective Jungian / Freudian based examination of your own inner demons,
Do I?
then play Xenogears. Right? Because it's all centered around like what happens literally inside a person's head and how that plays out, how that can like reach out and affect all of the people around you, even when you don't want it to. So not only is it like a gigantic metaphor for like actualization in a Jungian sense. I'm getting really fucking nerdy here. But like the whole killing God.
We are at a JRPG.
Yeah,
panel, so-
seriously. Like the whole killing God thing is way more than, and it's not an existential threat. It is like an internal transformation. You cannot become who you are or who you need to be without going through that God slaying motif, which is, I guess, where I kind of came up with the title for the panel, because I think
on.
that,
Okay.
that theme kind of carries through all of these God slaying JRPGs, which is like a huge, like level 1 you're saving a kitten, and then level 99 you're killing God. Like that's the
yeah,
meme.
and I think like that is kind of like part of the appeal of JRPGs, in that like you are progressing to the point that it's like, okay, I've killed the mean man in town, I've killed the dragon, time to kill God, I guess. And
Yeah.
like, it's really like it is cool. Like I remember the first time like just seeing even like Bizarro Sephiroth and just being like, oh, what the fuck is that? Like, and,
Right?
Yeah, no, so it's great. So then, like, obviously your love of JRPGs continued to the point that you actually became a voice actor.
I did.
And you voiced one of probably the most popular JRPG characters in recent memory. How did that go, and like how did you get into that position?
Like, how did I get who are my Fire Emblem fans out here? All right, sweet. So like, how did I get the role, or like how
let's do the whole thing, like, because that must have been a good day for you.
It was a good day. I didn't really know what it was all like, what it was all really about. You don't know what game you're auditioning for 99% of the time. It's all code named or whatever. And I kind of went in. It was like a new studio. I'm really like sexifying the story, because the real story is I auditioned for something and I got the job, right? Like that's, everyone's like, oh, tell me the story about how you got whatever. And it's like someone sent me a thing and I sent them an MP3 and they went, you're the guy. And I went, okay. But I had gone to the studio and I had first done a couple other Fire Emblem characters for heroes, Jamkey and Canis, who were like just like small. They have like the session's like 30 minutes long. You go and then you go like, ha, and they go, okay, here's your check. And then I got all these. I auditioned for a bunch. I auditioned for Ferdinand von Ayer. I auditioned for Dimitri, who's who I really wanted because he's totally unhinged. And then
Can we do a temperature check, just like the house divide in this?
oh yeah, okay, all right. Black Eagles, raise your hands and hang your heads. Blue Lions, raise your hands. And who fears the deer? That's right. Oh, I see you back there.
If the Blue Lions could stand up and then leave,
And then
that would be great.
Okay, but I didn't really know like how big of a deal it was. It was like, oh, because I had played one Fire Emblem game, and to like me, Fire Emblem was really niche. Like it wasn't
Because
as
like,
mainstream.
it had some success up until that point, but it was only like the fandom explosion was Three Houses.
Yeah, and I remember the day I figured that out as I went to do pickups, which is like after you do the main session, like you'll not do anything for a while, and then like 6 months or so before the game came out, I got called in. They're like, we need some pickups or cutscenes or whatever. So I walk in, and Patrick Seitz, who is the director, is sitting there. He's like, hey, have you seen the fan art? And I'm like, fan art? The game doesn't come out for 6 months. Who even knows what the hell what are you talking about, fan art? And he looks at me and he gives me this like, oh, sweet summer child look, right? And he goes, oh, you don't know. And I was like, no, what? And so he like takes out his phone and starts showing me all this Claude fan art. And I was like, oh, no. And then the game like totally exploded. I really did not expect it at all. But being in a JRPG, I don't know if it was my first JRPG, but it was probably the biggest role I had done in a JRPG.
Sure, yeah.
It was great because you get to see it all come together in bits and pieces, but it's also bad because you have to see it come together in bits and pieces. Like you don't get to experience the story. It was like permanently spoiled for me. I don't get to experience it through like your guys' eyes with that like that innocence that comes in when you start a JRPG.
I think that's like one of the weird parts about like creating things, because you never get to experience anything you make because you've been there for every tiny part of it. Like I feel like whenever anyone's like, oh, I really like that YouTube video you made, and I'm like, what about minute 8 when there's that like stray frame that pops up on screen for a second, and they're like, I like Garfield. You know, it's like, it's just you never get to experience it that way. And I've never thought about that from like a video game, especially like you then who loves JRPGs and never really, you're never going to be able to view it as just like a normal person because you're in it.
No, and as a matter of fact, my whole gaming catalog has mostly changed to games that don't have voices in them. Because either A, like I'm critiquing a performance, or B, I know everybody in the damn game, and like it's like I can't unhear Allegra from Mitsuru, right? Like I just can't unhear it. So it kind of spoils the experience for me a little bit. I've been known to play a lot in like Japanese, which sounds super ironic, but it's because I'm looking for a more innocent experience, right? Like coming into
because you want that degree of separation.
I do.
Yeah, totally. I had a interesting journey through Three Houses. I don't know how, but I ended up siding with the church by complete accident, because I felt like all the characters I like I was getting to the point where everyone's like, you know, we're gonna start doing some shit here, and I was like, yeah, let's fucking do it. Let's take down the church. And then I felt like I wake up one day and all the characters are gone, and the church is like, well, we have some problems to sort out, and you're our guy. And I was like, no. And then I had to go on my video game podcast, the Let's Fight a Boss podcast at the time, and they ruined me. They were completely like, John, we are so sick of your shit, and this is the final straw. Still don't know how it happened. I think I stopped playing at that point because I was so ashamed.
You never finished it?
Never finished it, no.
Wow, like any route. You never finished any route in the game.
No.
You got so disenfranchised with the fact that I'm propping up a tyrannical deist government. Maybe I don't want to do this.
Listen, I grew up in Ireland, okay?
Okay, sure, whatever.
Bit of a dark history with that kind of thing. But hey, JRPGs, everybody.
Oh boy, killing God. Woo!
But yeah, no, it's been really like when I saw that we were doing a panel together, I was like, that's so crazy, because like I only knew like your voice as like Claude up until that point.
Sure.
So, yeah. No, it's been really cool.
What about you? Like, where is your like? Is Final Fantasy VII your like lodestone for JRPG, or does like what is it that like really
I think
sold
Final
the genre
Fantasy VII for me, like that was definitely like the beginning of it. But then there was I think the next big one for me was I got really into like emulating SNES RPGs, because like there's just a bunch of stuff that never made it to Ireland, and I played Earthbound.
Oh, great!
And I was like, Earthbound and Final Fantasy VII for the longest time were like neck and neck for me. And then one day I was like, oh, they made a sequel to Earthbound. What's the point? Like, Earthbound's a perfect game, right? Like, how can you do better than Earthbound? It's not even called Earthbound 2. It's called Mother 3. That's dumb. I'm not going to play this game. And so for like 10 years, I didn't play it. And then one day I was like, you know what? I'll give Mother 3 a shot. And that game ruined me. It was just one of the most beautiful, hilarious, devastating games I've ever played. Have you played Mother 3?
I haven't. No, but
okay, Joe, listen,
I think we got
from
your video on it. I think
we got to make a deal here.
Okay.
I'll play Xenogears. You play Mother 3.
I think I can make that deal.
No.
I think I can make that deal. Absolutely. When you get to the second disc, call me.
Okay.
Just because it's going to be a rough ride. If you don't know the history behind it, they didn't finish the game.
Okay. So this is really dumb. I have not played Xenogears. I have watched a couple of like 4-hour videos about it. So I know the kind of like broad strokes of it. In terms of like its production at least, and it does seem like fascinating, and it also has like some of the most beautiful pixel art I've ever
It's really
seen.
Cool.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Great music too. Fantastic music.
But then like I made my way through like pretty much all the Final Fantasies as well, like 8, 9, 10. What'd you say?
Yeah,
Did you
Chrono
say-
Trigger's awesome.
Did you say when's Chrono Trigger?
I think it's all the time.
Shut up and talk about Chrono
Yeah, oh.
Trigger. I respect it. Obviously at some point you have to play Chrono Trigger as well, and that is just like a magical game.
It is, but it brings up a beef point for me. What the fuck is up with silent protagonists?
Okay.
Why do we have them, and why are they only in JRPGs?
So I would say what's the temperature in the room about silent protagonists? Who like hates them? Not that much vitriol.
God, we need like a Q&A opposite. I just want to know why people love silent protagonists. Yes, personifying yourself is like the answer that everybody kind of throws out. I get it, but like you don't have a silent protagonist in a novel. Like you don't just have blank pages where you're like, oh, I can put in what I want here. So why does it work in a video game
so
setting?
Weird.
Like, it would be so awkward. Like it is when you're having a conversation with one person and only when two people and only one of them is talking. I'm not shitting. I am shitting on silent protagonists. I mean, I don't know why I'm trying to I have a very strong opinion, and I play games that are great. I love Persona, Zelda. Chrono Trigger is great, but like that choice always baffled me. So,
yeah, it's not something that ever stood out to me particularly, but it's like the more you look at it, the more it's like, wait, what is going on here?
right.
But it's with Chrono Trigger. I think the thing about Chrono Trigger is I love that cast so much, and they're also
They're all
weird
fantastic.
and interesting, and like I love Frog. Like he's just
Yes.
yeah. So it never bothered me too much, but sometimes I feel like when someone has like a little bit of a personality, but they're kind of silent as well. That nearly clashes with me more because sometimes they'll say something, and I was like, I wouldn't fucking say that. Don't you put words in my mouth? You know what I mean?
You're no longer personifying me.
But you mentioned Persona as well. Which Persona would be your favorite?
Oh, Persona 3.
Interesting. Okay.
100%. But I think there's some nostalgia to that because I remember discovering the game. I was I was new in the Air Force, and I was at a training base by myself, and I went to a GameStop and I went, that looks interesting. Put it in, and then the first song hit, and I went, what the fuck is this? and it was like I was hooked immediately, and so that one kind of stuck with me. I love Persona 5 too. But yeah, 3 is always.
I think I've beaten 3 and 5, and I've never beaten 4. But I think it's like the kind of 4 is like the most Twin Peaks. It's like you come to town and there's weird. I kind of
get that,
and I kind of love that about it.
Yeah.
And I love the whole thing with the Midnight Channel and all that. And I love the fighting game as well. Ultimax is it's
I haven't
just,
played it, but
oh man, even if you don't like fighting games, just seeing how those characters have been translated into a fighting game is so good. But yeah. I was kind of curious to take some.
I'm up for Q&A for you guys.
You guys be up for that? Cool.
It can be about killing God. It could be about storytelling in JRPGs, or it could be about whatever. So
yeah.
Here, you pick one. I'll pick one.
Okay. Who we got? Everyone's always really shy at the start. Now, what I will say is you don't need to be shy, but if we get a bad question, we're gonna get really fucking mad.
So pissed.
It's gonna be like, you ruined this panel.
Yeah.
Let's go for you there, sir, with the beard.
A wise man once said that characters plus time is really cool. What would be your best example?
Did you say character? A wise man once said, "Characters plus time, plus time is really cool."
You see the P3 characters plus some years.
Oh, so when you know a character and then you meet an aged up version of them, that kind of way. So it's a little different, but I think what happens to Robo and Chrono Trigger is it's devastating. It's so good. I'm sorry, this lady's running.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I think characters plus time is just like life, right? Like that's plot. So you can look at it and you say oh, that's incredible, and then you play Final Fantasy IV: The After Years, and you're like, maybe that's not a good idea. So it doesn't always work from a storytelling perspective, but I think it's compelling because we're all moving through time, right? All stories are just a reflection of us in them, right? It's a way for us to learn and spread new points of view. So anything where you're watching characters move through time, you're watching them grow, you're watching them fuck up, you're watching all that stuff. That's really compelling. So
I think actually fighting games can be a really cool example of that. Street Fighter 6, we're meeting kind of older man Ryu now, and it's oh wow, has a beard and a cloak that implies so much,
right?
But yeah, no, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Do you ever get kind of nervous picking people because you're trying to point to someone and it's kind of the person you mean and it's kind of not.
All the time.
Because I remember one time there was like, I was doing a panel. This was years ago, but I always think of it. And there was this girl dressed as like one of the scouts from Team Fortress.
Mm-hmm.
And they just go, sorry, you're the scout from Team Fortress. And I swear to God, this dude in front of her stands up and he's in full like Bilbo Baggins cosplay. And he says like so defiantly, I'm Bilbo Baggins from Lord of the Rings.
We had no doubts. Thank you.
And like he just launches into his question and I was like, sir, I'm gonna need you to turn around. and then he turns around and he sees the girl dressed as Scout and he just melted. It was. Don't feel sorry for him.
We're gonna do
That
the
was
same
my
to you in just a
fucking
couple
panel,
seconds.
all right.
Yeah. Okay, who else? Right here, I saw you here, Pablo.
So, killing gods are obviously a big thing in JRPGs, but it's sort of a thing that you'll also see in some Western RPGs with some differing amounts of context. The main example I can think of here is Darkest Dungeon, where that is kind of the goal for the whole game, and that doesn't go well. So I was just wondering if there are any other particular examples of how Western RPGs or Western games in general can handle that topic of killing gods differently than you'll generally see in JRPGs, or the kinds of things that they'll use instead of killing gods that are still big, climactic, final.
I think the thing that they use instead of killing gods is usually some like amalgamation of monsters, right? Like it's Western storytelling is very like good versus evil. You know, like our histories like of biblical influence and puritanical influence and like all that stuff is like pitting this force against this force, and one of them is correct and one of them is incorrect. And JRPGs, like they mesh a lot of that because there's a lot of like, I'm thinking back to Xenogears. It's like, well, does this make the most sense to kill this godlike thing? Whereas in Western RPGs, it is usually very much like an existential question. Like if we don't do this, the world ends. It's avoiding an apocalypse or something like that. I don't know. How do you think that we can handle that in a Western culture in a way that?
I think it's interesting because like a lot of the time when we come like say like Darkest Dungeon 2, that is a game very much about like suffering and dealing with like bad situations. I was playing Darkest Dungeon 2 on the plane over here and
Nice.
dying to the same fucking boss that I've just been stuck on for so long now. But I think like another game that kind of deals with it in a similar way would be like Fear and Hunger. And that's an interesting one because like there's a couple of different endings to Fear and Hunger 1, but it kind of the like one of the final bosses is the god of fear and hunger, and you fight it and you realize there's just nothing you can do to it. Like it's completely really impossible for you to affect in any way, and it's like it's this really harrowing realization, and like it's a brutally difficult game. Have you ever touched those games?
Mm-mm.
They are a lot. They're really, really great, but they're really difficult and they're really interesting, and they're very much like part of them is like the loss of humanity and like the things you have to do to get to like this like really deep down awful god creature, and then you get there and it's like you were never able to affect anything. Like one of the endings is literally just you escaping the dungeon and you realize that like you like just your character is so traumatized from meeting this god, and it's really interesting because
This is a hard sell. I'm not happy right now.
Yeah.
Deep inside, right? Like
you'll learn this over the course of this panel. I'm a deeply miserable
yeah. Okay.
person.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's dig into it. But you make a really good point. All of like the really successful Western RPGs aren't fighting God. They're fighting us. They're fighting other men, right? Like men and women, humans. We're the problem, right? Like because we set ourselves up in the Western world as our own gods. So it is a somewhat similar theme, but yeah, it's an interesting point.
It's kind of interesting because even like Baldur's Gate 3, there's gods in that, and like they're kind of not background characters, but it's more like what the people who inherit those powers are doing, and that's a really interesting.
Yeah,
one
even
as
like
well.
God of War, those aren't gods. They're humans. They're an aspect of a human totally amplified, right? It's really interesting.
Let's see here who we got. How about you with the purple hat there? Yes.
So in the Shadow Heart series,
Ooh, nice reference.
many gods to fight. But also this thing where it's set in like it's in like World War I era. It's actually like parallel history, but of course got monsters, demons, many demons. Rasputin's there, and it's all kind of weird, but it all kind of like works. But also just it got me thinking like, if I've often seen that where it tries to do like the RPG setting and the, parallel timeline. And it's like, aside from that one Shin Megami Tensei that I can't pronounce right now, I can't think of any other instances. So do you think that's a cool idea to go with, or do you think it's just easier to just keep that to like creating a separate universe where it's like not like,
So I guess, would you be asking like kind of about unconventional settings in RPGs?
yeah, well, it's like
Historical fiction, essentially, yeah?
historical fiction versus just, create your own world.
I think it can work in. I mean, look at Wolfenstein, right? Like that's essentially historical fiction. Any Call of Duty game is historical fiction, even though it's more modern in a lot of senses. Assassin's Creed is in a lot of ways historical fiction. It's based very loosely on Hashishin and like all that kind of stuff. But
It's interesting. I've actually been playing like not lost PS1 RPG, but just one I'd never heard of called I think it's Jeanne d'Arc. Has anyone played it? It's like a couple of people. It's like this really like actually kind of awesome. Sorry, we will get back to your question. It's actually this really awesome JRPG where it has this mechanic where you have like your main character and you can basically go Super Saiyan for a couple of turns at one point every battle. It's kind of like Disgaea, like that sort of thing. And that's like a really interesting term, like a really interesting look at like, okay. And as an Irish person, it's kind of cool because it's like, for some reason, the English are all like snake people and monsters. And I'm like, all right, sure. But yeah, no, that's an interesting one. Haven't killed God in that one yet, but yeah, I'll keep you posted.
I brought up Assassin's Creed as a historical fiction, and like eventually though, and almost to your point, you do get to the point where you're like, oh, I probably need to kill God, right? Like, and what's interesting about that is maybe I'm reading the temperature of the fandom wrong, but it's at that point where the fandom went, no, maybe not, right? Like there was a disconnect. There was like cognitive dissonance between what you thought you were doing and what you were doing, and it didn't work in that settings, which kind of reminds me of the question here about like how we do that in the Western world as well. I don't know how to solve the problem, but it raises an interesting question about like, can we tackle that in that setting, or is it too constricting? I think Assassin's Creed presents a case where it's too constricting. I don't know how I would have done it different, like if I was on the writing board, but I don't know.
I have such a strong memory of my friend telling me about Assassin's Creed 2 and being like, dude, you can kill the Pope. Do you want to go for another question? Let's go for you there with the yellow t-shirt. Yes, you.
Yeah, I just want to ask a quick one. Like, if you guys had any favorite, like, unlikable protagonists in RPGs, like ones that start out unlikable, like, Titus or from...
So I'm sorry, Titus starts out unlikable or ends up unlikable? I've played the game many times, I still don't like him. So I'm not sure where he starts.
intention, I guess. But yeah, like Luke from Tales from the Abyss, like characters like that where they have a good arc, but they start out pretty unlikable.
Yeah, so unlikable, basically characters that I don't know. I think the people at the back in here are right, but it's basically RPG characters that start out unlikable and who kind of win you over in the end. Man, it's not an RPG at all, so this is a terrible answer. But I played through Mouthwashing recently, and there's a character from that where, like, at the start of the stream, I was like, "Man, fuck this guy," and then towards the end, like, it just turns him around so much. You're like, "Oh no, he was the only good one." But RPG characters.
I'm struggling to think of like an RPG. The thing that comes to mind is Joel from The Last of Us, who is like, you like him, you hate him, you like him, you hate him, you like him, and now you're just confused. Like it's like that his opinion, like your opinion of him flips so many times. I'm trying to think of like a JRPG perspective of someone that like I hated. Hated it first? Is that what you're saying?
Like, I guess more of a better question would be like best arcs for a protagonist.
Oh.
Okay. I remember like going back to original Sid in Final Fantasy VII is real rough. It's like,
oh yeah,
I had such a memory of him. It's like, oh, he's this kind of foul-mouthed pilot, and then you get to him and he's really mean to his wife, and it's like, oh
mean.
no.
Squall, I think, gets a lot of hate, but he develops, I think, pretty. He's like this petty emo edgelord who just like cares nothing for anybody around him, and by the end of the game, you're like, maybe you'll turn out okay. It doesn't quite get to like, oh, I love this guy, but it gets like, okay, you grew up a little bit for sure. He is, but like, is anybody in a JRPG a teenager? Like they're all, you know, like they're all like CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and like. Yeah, that's. I get that. Let's go all the way in the back. I see like a red headband, or behind the red headband. Yes. Yes.
You mentioned the idea of the silent protagonist earlier in your talk and how you dislike them. I don't think it really bothered me until I saw the blending of those two styles in Metaphor, giving the silent protagonist a voice actor, but still allowing the player to like make the dialogue choice. What do you think of that distinction? And do you have any examples of any characters, like protagonists with a voice that you really particularly like?
So when you blend it like that, I think you do, and like when I teach acting a lot now, and I'm always telling my students, like, look, if you're gonna make a choice, make that choice. Because if you try to straddle the line between two different ideas for a take, then it just comes out bland. And I think maybe that's what you're talking about. It's like you have a silent protagonist, but they have some input, like they have some agency, and it confuses you. Whereas like you have a protagonist that has a lot of agency, isn't quite silent, like Mass Effect, right? Where like there's lots of dialogue, but you still have lots of agency as the player to feel like you're making those choices. Or on the opposite side, like Zelda, where you have like no dialogue at all. So I think like making that choice is important for narrative design. I don't know that I've found a game that like hits that tries to blend it with me.
I think one that I always thought it did, like where I felt like I had a lot of onus on the character, but the character was still very much the character, was Red Dead Redemption 2 and Arthur Morgan. But I think in that, I feel like the way they wrote him is really interesting because they basically wrote two different characters based on who that guy could be. Whereas like one of them is like, you know, very like, he's kind of contemplative and he's nice and he kind of thinks about his past actions and all this kind of stuff. And then the other is just like a horrible monster. But both them are like well-written characters with like their own kind of thing. And it's more like your choices lead you to one or the other. And I think that works super, super well. It's interesting that you bring up Metaphor. I talked about on stream how like I didn't like Metaphor that much and my chat revolted against me. Yeah, I know.
I haven't played it yet. It's still sealed. Like
Yeah.
I got it for Christmas, so it's
for the love of God,
on
like
my-
it, Joe. They will never. forgive me.
Okay, a lot of pressure.
I gave it my award for a game that I'll say some nice things about now because I'm going to cut it from my Game of the Year list later. And I was like, listen, this can never come back to get me. Wait, panel on JRPGs.
Yeah, okay,
Whoa. But yeah. Okay, let's go for it. How about you with the red hair there? I believe yes.
Hi. So
Hello.
a lot of JRPGs, when you get to that point of there being a god that needs to be killed, it can sometimes feel like a jump the shark moment where you're going from some human level threat to a deific threat. Do you have any thoughts on like games that do this particularly bad or particularly well, or something that makes it so that it is better or worse?
It's tricky because I feel like sometimes with stuff like this, when you say like, well, I didn't like how this JRPG did it, there will always be someone with a 3-hour video essay being like, actually, if you read the subtext, it's like, okay. I remember like I loved Final Fantasy IX. I thought it was fantastic.
I was actually literally going to bring this up.
Yeah, and then towards the end, I feel like it does just kind of go, and I'm a god now, fight me. It's
Yep.
like, whoa, okay, cool.
Final Fantasies are pretty notorious for it. Even like I named that thing you were talking about. I call it the Zeramis effect, where it's like you get to the end of the game and they're like, and Zemus, and you're like, who? But his name is Zeramis. What? What are you talking about? We were here to fight Golbez. Where did this guy come from? It's the same thing in Final Fantasy. What was it? Necron? What?
It was
Just
me
like
all along, and you're like, what?
Yeah. So like, yes. Yeah. Okay. I get it. Like it's so yes. When it's done badly, it's done very badly. It does feel like it jumps the shark. All the examples we just gave are really late game. And all the examples where it works is like you really feel it coming much sooner. In writing, you're always thinking about, I want to make it surprising, but it has to be surprising but inevitable. Like it has to be the foregone conclusion that you go back and go, oh.
Yeah.
You know, if not, it's jumping the shark.
One example I actually really liked, there's the 360 game Azora's Wrath, and there's like It's always interesting because I think Azura's Wrath's like kind of a terrible game, but kind of an awesome anime box set that you have to play. And it's like the DLC for that, like the final super secret last boss that you have to pay for, and that sucks as well. But it's basically you fighting the spirit of creation, which is just God. And it's like one of the most insane fights I've ever seen in a video game.
Is this the one with the 22-second scream at the end? Is that
probably?
Yeah.
Like, it's so wild because like there's lots of like quick time events in Azura's Wrath. I'm like, you know, they're kind of whatever. But in that fight, you see God's controller. And God starts fucking up his own QuickTime events. It's just like it's not an amazing game to play, but with moments like that, I'm just like, no, that's an amazing game. It's so good.
That sounds like Monty Python wrote Heavy Rain. That's what that sounds like.
That I would play. That I would absolutely
play
play.
that.
Yep. Next question, please.
Green hat in front.
So, obviously, in order to kill God, you need to get very far in the game. What are your opinions on how much time do you have to put into an RPG before you can say, I'm done? For instance, 20 hours into Persona 3.
I feel like this is a question designed to settle beef in a friend group, right?
Only partially, but at the same time.
So, like, it is a really good question. Like, how much of a piece of media do you have to experience before you get to have an opinion on it? And my feeling on this is like, hey, look, if you played like an hour of Persona 4 and you're like, I hate this, that's cool. That's fine. Like, I think, like, it's okay. If someone doesn't finish a video game, I think their opinion is, like, in a lot of ways, like, as interesting as someone who played, like, 100 hours of it. Because, like, okay, well, what about this didn't grab you? Like, what about this didn't work for you? What about this was so repellent that, like, you couldn't keep going with it? And I know that's always frustrating to fans of like, a game or a series. But I've also gotten so many, like... I remember, like, when I told people I didn't really like Metaphor that much, they were like, well, how much did you play? And I was like, 12 hours. And they were like, 12 hours? It gets so good at 40 hours. and like, I get it, but I didn't like the first 12, and I don't know that that's going to change. I don't know. Joe, am I crazy here?
No, I don't think you're crazy at all. I think it's your tolerance for, like, how you spend your time. I think about this a lot. Like, you know, people recommend shows and, like, oh, you got to get past the first season. I'm like, it takes me a month to watch the first season. Are you kidding me? Like, why? But there's, you know, that payoff happens everywhere in life where you work for a little bit and then you get a payoff, and then you work for a little bit and then you get a payoff. The question really is, like, should that be games? Right? Is that why you go to a game? Like, what is your desired outcome for jumping into something and playing it? Is it, you know, to work and then get a reward, in which case, okay, maybe the first 20-hour slog, you go, man, I made that through, and that felt good. There's a principle I made up called the value exchange, which is where, like, you don't do anything, and it applies to everything. Everything. It doesn't matter, games, the economy, whatever you do, getting a hamburger, whatever you do, you have to believe you're getting the better part of the exchange, or you simply won't do it, right? And then it's everything. Talking to your mom, it doesn't matter. So, like, if you got through the first 20 hours of the game, there was something in there that you were like, there's a value exchange for me to continue doing it. Either, you know, I'm looking for a payoff, or there's some mechanic that's keeping me going, or, you know, there's the clout of me talking about it with my friends or something. So, like, if you don't get value from it, you won't do it. Even if that value is, I can get to the end of that 20 hours and go, fuck this game, really loudly on Reddit, you know? So there's more benefit than, like, getting to that point. It's a bigger discussion, I think, but I don't know.
I think there's also, like, it's hard sometimes because, like, if you're playing a long game and you're not feeling it, the thing that really weighs on me is, like, the idea of opportunity cost.
Yes.
Like, oh, I could be playing something else as well. Because, like, I remember when I was playing Metaphor, I kept thinking, like, man, I could be playing Shin Megami 5 Vengeance. And so I started playing that game and absolutely fell in love with it. And so, like, it is always difficult because, especially, like, when you do get older and, like, when you have a job and responsibilities, there's only so many hours in the day, and you want to feel like those hours are going well. Like, oh God, I miss being able to put 50 hours into a game that I thought was okay. That is luxury. That like, if you're in that stage of life, treasure it, my friend, because one day you'll wake up and it's never coming back.
Yeah, like one day you'll start putting books down. You know, like I used to never put books down. I would get to the end and be like, I didn't like that book, and I would get. Now it's like, if it doesn't grab me, it's gone.
Sometimes like I will meet people and they'll put like 100 hours into a game and they're like, yeah, it's all right. And I'm like, what is wrong? Why would you do that? Yeah. But anyway, next question, please. Let's go for the person holding the pochita.
Okay, so I think it's no secret that a lot of these JRPGs we've come to know and love are very like teenage focused, like teenage young person protagonists. So now that we're older, does it ever kind of take you out of like the story, like with how like some of the older adult characters tend to be like depicted, like specifically. Okay, so we mentioned Sid from Final Fantasy VII. Like you look at his original design, like he's like he looks like a very like experienced, like cantankerous, like old man. He's 32.
Oh God.
From like Final Fantasy IX, the King of Lindblom, Grey Mother, 35.
Yeah, I'm dead in anime years.
Yeah. Yeah, if you put like an anime filter on us, we're both just like dust flying
Yeah,
in the
we're-
wind. Yeah, it's always.
Ichiban Kasuga. 40 plus.
Yep.
Man, I'd love to look that good at 40. God damn it. But yeah, it's. I get that like in just like there is such a gut punch sometimes, especially like in anime when it's like, get out of here, old man. And it's like, I'm only 25. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh my God. In terms of like, I think there is definitely like, I would love to see more JRPGs about like, like older people and about like more like, I was going to say adult scenarios, but I think those do exist.
You should play Xenogears.
I always think of like, there's a JRPG about playing as the president of Sega when the Dreamcast was failing, and your job is to sell Dreamcasts.
Did you cook this up, or is this a real game?
This is a real game. I know, it's insane.
Maybe we don't need those games. Maybe never mind. Let's stick to teenagers. Yeah, like I was thinking about this exact thing like last week as I was playing through P3R, and I found myself being like, I can't relate to a lot of these things anymore, and it's like a little sad to like let that go, and it's hard to talk about it. I don't talk about it a lot because you never want to seem like I'm infantilizing people that like JRPGs, right? Or like that kind of story. But like I'm no longer in the phase of life where I need to figure out who I am, right? Like, which is what a lot of JRPGs are about. They're about taking parts of your character and like solidifying them, actualizing them, being comfortable in your own skin so that you can go into the world as a creature of agency. I'm not there anymore. So like if I don't have the nostalgic bent where like I'm going back and playing, a Final Fantasy game or a Persona game because I played it before, a lot of times like I can't get into the new thing because I'm like, that story doesn't work for me. On the opposite side, there are plenty of kids movies that we still go and watch and they hit, right? And there's a reason for that. And I think it's good writing. It's like there's themes that are omnipresent that everyone can relate to no matter their age in life. And there are problems that we all have about like our identity and like who we are and how we fit in society rather than like how we fit within ourselves. And it's a really masterful story that can like transcend ages. JRPGs have like they tend to shoot like that teen niche, and that's okay. Like there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel that.
Would
a
you
lot.
say like, is there any JRPG you can think of that has like you'd consider like a kind of timeless story?
Xenogears?
Yeah.
I do really mean that because it really is about like what it is to be human at its core. But
I think for me, like that one would probably be Mother 3. And like, I don't want to say too much about it, but it's like, it's a game about how like the most awful thing can happen to you, but the world is still really weird and funny and interesting. And if you keep going, you will get to a new point where like things are okay again. And I don't know, world's been kind of weird these last couple of weeks. So I think that's like that's kind of like, that's always a nice message to have.
And that's a universal theme in storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go like hyper nerd here. Has anybody ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh? It's the oldest story. It's the oldest story ever recorded from the Sumerian myth, right? And so Gilgamesh, this is like the exact same thing you're talking right now, but this is 1,000 years before the Iliad. There was the Epic of Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh's friend Enkidu dies in his arms, right? And he mourns over him for days and days and days. And eventually he asks some sort of like demigod immortal. He's like, what is the fucking point? Like, why, if this is where everyone is heading, what's the point? And Utnapishtim, the person he talks to, is basically like, why are you worried about that? Hold your kid's hand, go laugh, eat good food, wear nice clothes, have fun, enjoy this, because that's what you have. And that's the exact same thing you just,
totally.
right? We've been telling the same fucking stories for 6,000, 8,000, 10,000
That's
years.
such a good answer.
Like,
That's
isn't
so
that
much
cool?
better than what I said.
I don't know. That's awesome. Thanks. So universal themes.
Let's see here. Who will we go for? Let's go for you.
So by the time you're killing God in an RPG, you've probably already beat some kind of systemic problem, the church, the kingdom, whatever. And killing God almost becomes personal. And it's a very personal point in the character's story. Why do we use killing God as like an apotheosis for a character?
Because after, like, that's the final thing, right? You've already beat everything else to death with your sword, but I think it is the ultimate. That's the point where you can like look at this world and be like, okay, God was kind of an asshole. He's dead now. I can leave here and everything's going to be good again. I think like it's as far as you can go in changing what this place is.
I think it's also, I like that. And also, what created the system? Like, you just got done beating different levels of the system, whether it's, you're saving a cat and something caused that cat to be in peril, or you're helping a neighbor and something that caused that neighbor to be. Now you're up to the government, now you're up to the church, now you're up to God. It's all parts of the same system. So I think it's like not just the next logical step, but also like a metaphor for what causes that problem. Once you are outside of the system, all that's left is you. And so now you have to go inward and solve that problem, which if you're killing God, you're killing yourself in a way. I don't mean that in like a violent sense. I mean like a death and rebirth kind of way. I think that's what most killing God JRPGs themes are. It's more like a metaphor for.
I have to be honest, that is such a better answer than I thought we would reach in this panel. We were kind of just swinging for the wind there,
We really
but no,
were.
we got it. Right. Next question, please. Let's go someone far in the back. You right in the back next to the mirror. So in Western RPGs, sometimes you have the option to like talk down a boss or beat them through talking, like in Mass Effect or Fallout New Vegas or something like that. Whereas in JRPGs, it's always like, time to die, motherfucker. I don't know. That's an interesting one. Yep.
I'm trying to think of, is it a chronological thing where, like Western RPGs kind of, I feel in a weird way like blossomed later than JRPGs. So like there's like this sense that like when you the game's always had a point, right? Like you have to accomplish an objective, and it's always like fighting, and it's always that. So I wonder if it was like, well, maybe there's a different way to solve this problem, and then it came out in a different way. I don't know. Yeah.
I wonder, is it something to do with like more of a focus on like the kind of role-playing part of like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that? Whereas like I think a lot of JRPGs initially are very focused. Like when you look at Dragon Quest, it was pretty much like that was a simulator to like have the battles from a kind of Dungeons and Dragons game, like simplified. But the story and like the kind of like role-playing part of it was quite, like even now in Dragon Quest, not very like substantial. But when you go back to like old Ultima games, it's like the dialogue and like how you talk to characters, the keywords you use was such a big part of it. But it's interesting because even now I still feel like say take something like Disco Elysium. I feel like Disco Elysium feels like a game that fell out of a different like plane of reality where Mario talked instead of jumped, And
Don't spoil it for me because it's actually next on my list. It's just saying, like,
so
it's
I
next
won't
on my list.
spoil anything. I would say like be prepared to struggle with it for a little bit because it's so different to anything else. But it is like in terms of like what it does with dialogue and how it makes that the gameplay. It's kind of, there's just nothing I've ever really seen like it. Like it's amazing. So to answer your question, I still don't know.
No, I don't know either.
But
I have no idea.
it sure is interesting to think about.
Gentleman in the mask, glasses, blue shirt.
So we talked a lot about killing God and talking about what a character does to God, but we haven't focused on the gods themselves. So either in RPGs or in fiction, what's your favorite god? Not non-fiction. Let's ignore that.
Favorite god in an RPG?
So, oh man, this is gonna be a difficult one to get into without spoilers, but I guess like there's a certain ability in Undertale that you have and you don't understand what it is, but it basically gives you like near infinite power over this world. And I think a lot of what I love about that game, it is about like what happens when you treat a real world like a video game. What happens when you go through it over and over and over and over and over and you are just doing things to see what happens. And the way it's conveyed towards the end of the No Mercy route really does make me feel like, oh wow, I'm a god that doesn't care and this sucks. Like this is really, it's horrible, but I think that's like kind of amazing. So it's like, obviously like there's a lot of like, you know, big gods who are like the kind of more systemic problems with the world, but I think that's the one of the only games that's made me nearly see a video game from the view of a last boss, from the view of like, well, you're the worst thing in this game. And I think that's really powerful.
My version of that is Emmett Selk in Final Fantasy XIV. They're like the Ascians as like a race, you know, you go through and like you fucking hate them for so much of the game. And I guess I don't know. I don't want to spoil it too much too, but like at the end of his arc, oh my gosh, who's the one that comes after him? That sounds like a beauty product. Elidibus. Elidibus for men, right? Like I'm always like looking like it's just like I have smooth skin because I use Elidibus twice a day. The way that they humanize those evil god-like beings is absolutely perfect. Like one of the best in any game I've ever played. Period.
I've heard so many like really strong recommendations for 14, but I'm like, oh man, it's like 100-hour on like MMO. I don't know if I have time.
It's the only game where someone's point earlier about like how far do you have to go in before it's worth it? You have to. Like you can't, if you go and judge it by a Realm Reborn, you'll leave every time.
Right.
You'll like every single time. And then at some point, like the game collapsed and it was reborn and it became one of the greatest things out of the Final Fantasy universe.
I know so many people who are like, that is the best Final Fantasy. And that sounds insane to me, but at the same time, so many people love it.
It is, and it's only like all the other Final Fantasies walked so that 14 could run. You know what I mean? Like there's so much in 14 that would make no goddamn sense if, you know, like the other Final Fantasies didn't kind of like set that stage. But I could talk about 14 all day.
Yeah. Next question, please. Let's go for you in the striped shirt. Yes, you.
This question is for Joe specifically. So you mentioned playing Persona 3 Reload. How is it to one, play the game when you played the original when you were younger, and two, how is it to play when you voice a character?
So I've played tons of games that I voice a character in, and it eventually you sort of stop hearing yourself and you start hearing like whatever that character was. Like I'm not listening to myself so much anymore. I mean, Kenji was like, you know, he's a social link, but he's in there a ton, but he's enough off the beaten path that I'm like not super concerned about it. And it is like I'm playing through it because I like P3, but given the choice, I'd probably play the old version because it scratches that nostalgia itch. I don't have, like I know everybody on that damn cast. Like we hang out. I just hear like Alejandro. Like I don't hear, you know. But it's still really cool to see that story still being powerful and the music still kicks ass. So
Yeah, it's a beautiful remake as well.
It is.
I could not get over like how gorgeous it looked.
it looks great. It sounds great, and they like they really. I didn't think there was not a lot to clean up gameplay wise, but like it does not feel like an old game. So yeah, I love it.
So guys, we probably have time for like one or two more questions here. So who would like to ask? Let's go for the Danganronpa cosplayer. Yeah.
Nice.
Hello.
So I noticed you were talking about like the different religious acts, like religious influence and aspects on like Western RPGs versus JRPGs, and of course like you have Japanese spirituality and that kind of influence versus Western spirituality. But I was wondering of your opinion on like for Western RPGs, I'm thinking about like Fear and Hunger, and like I don't know if you call it an RPG, but even like Pathologic or something of those natures. But how would you feel about like almost the positive, negative, and neutral of killing God across the different like cultures?
I'm not familiar with either of those examples, so I'm not sure I can. No, it's okay. I just I'm sorry. Are you?
So yeah, I'm familiar through Pathologic purely through H Bomber Guy's video, and I think if we're going to be really honest, most of you are. But in terms of Fear and Hunger, like it's an interesting one because it's kind of like there's a lot of different ways to view like the actual battle with God in that, and in none of them I think is it expressly positive. Like none of it do you like leave the dungeons of Fear and Hunger and it's like, hooray, I did it. It's all just like you became lost in the dungeon forever, or you were deeply traumatized and never left mentally. But I'm trying to think of like other examples like that, and it's kind of difficult because it's kind of like I think it kind of goes back to the question earlier where especially in JRPGs the god is always a problem to be solved, right? And I think that is what I enjoyed so much about Fear and Hunger in terms of like it's not that, like it's just you are really encountering this thing, and like it also comes back to like the kind of problem you have with people trying to adopt like Cthulhu and gods like that, where it's like, okay, but if this is really a god, it doesn't have a health bar, and I think that has led to a lot of like really interesting game design problems that I think stuff like Fear and Hunger like has handled well. But yeah, that is a difficult one. I wish I could give you a better answer. I am so sorry. I do really like your Danganronpa cosplay.
Cool. I see like a red sweater. Yes, you leaned out. Yes, you.
So my question is, how do you feel about JRPGs where either a prophecy or the history in it is an unreliable narrator and ends up forming a kind of flawed god? So like either Skies of Arcadia or Legend of Dragoon or Grandia 2.
Ooh, Legend of Dragoon. That's reaching back. Unreliable narrators as a storytelling device are always super interesting because you have that moment of like dissociation where you don't know who to trust anymore. But I think like an imperfect prophecy creating an imperfect God. I think perfect prophecies also create imperfect gods. Do you know what I mean? Like from a narrative perspective, one just does it out of like overt manipulation. Right, you have a someone writing something like, "Oh, I'm gonna get him with this because I'm gonna tell him that eventually some guy looks just like me. There's gonna be I've got to right." One of them is like overtly evil, and the other one is almost like an accident, right? Like it's a amalgamation of a lot of different energy into one entity that then just like doesn't fit. So I think both are really effective, if done well.
It's interesting. Like they're not JRPGs, but there's a lot of that I feel like in Silent Hill, the series. There's a lot of like, oh, that's God, what is happening? And like I think that can be like really, really interesting, especially in Silent Hill 3, where like the whole game is just this really horrific attempt to birth a god and like how that manifests visually and like what it means to Heather in terms of like, her own onus over like her body and stuff and how it all it's I feel like it's very late into the panel for me to get into why that is so cool, but I think that would probably be one of my favorite examples of it. We probably have time for one more. Do you want to pick it, Joe?
Sure. I see another red sweater, like red dead. Yes, you're waving. Yes.
So you mentioned earlier how Western RPGs are more so us killing ourselves with humanity. Would you
say that it's more so an ideological thing? Because in the West, we more so triumph the individual, whereas Japan kind of triumphs hierarchy and a certain status quo that you must fulfill.
I think that's probably accurate. I mean, a lot of times what happens when in Western RPGs, when we get to like the final boss who is a human, it's a human that has taken, Western values and amplified them to the point where they're totally out of control. Instead of becoming like, a leader, they become megalomaniacal, right? Like that's just the way it goes. It's an amplification of twisted values. And I think the same could probably be said for the JRPG too. It's like that amplification of, like the idea of like a big collective, and now it becomes like harshly utilitarian, where like, okay, now I'm gonna Thanos snap is a very JRPG kind of idea. I think that's probably accurate.
Yeah, I think again, like not a JRPG necessarily, but I think the way that Berserk handles Griffith's godhood is like really. Don't cheer for him. He does have cool hair, but it's like, and like I really, the thing I really despise about Griffith, and like especially like his effect on the world, and he's making all these really positive changes. It's like you find yourself in moments being like, man, that's a good idea. A school system funded by the government. This guy's on to, and then you're like, wait, no. And I think like it's interesting in like how it handles that. Like he is this person who is taking this humanitarian approach to being a god, but he also fucking sucks. So, yeah, it's interesting. Guys, I think that is going to do it on our panel on how to kill God. You all now have the...
Yeah. Go out there and kill God.
Yeah, you all know how to kill God now. So go out there, have a great time. I want to see none left. And yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for coming, guys. Enjoy Mags.